Good afternoon, everybody. It's Big Seven here, back for another NFL Draftstars video. Took a small profit on the Cleveland and Steelers game, but I'm here to turn that profit into a bigger profit on the main slate today. As per usual, it's a $50,000 slate, about 4,000 entries, almost 5,000 up top. Hopefully, so I'm going to go through the breakdown of players that I've used. Hopefully that helps you guys out as well. If you enjoy the content, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get swiftly into it. So, as per usual, I've got my 20 teams that I've entered into the competition. I'll start with the quarterbacks. Main player I've selected is Jared Goff in 5 of my teams. He's at 11,000 in a matchup that should be pretty high scoring. I think it's the second or third highest totaled game on the slate. And he's a lot cheaper than Kirk Cousins, who's, I think, about 3,000 more in that same game. And yeah, he's just the cheapest player that's got a big totaled matchup, and he is very easy to stack with as well. You can stack him with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's the clear number 1 wide receiver at Detroit, and putting up wide receiver 1 numbers. And you've also got Justin Jefferson in the same matchup, fairly expensive, but he's expensive for a reason. He's an absolute jet. Next most popular, I've got Mahomes in 4 of my teams. I think this one could slide under the radar a bit. I think people will be looking more towards Buffalo and Miami, and potentially Jalen Hurts as well, who I've got 4 of as well. Patrick Mahomes, another player that's fairly easy to stack with as well. Travis Kelce is the clear number 1 tight end on the slate. I'm not looking to pairing up with any other Kansas City wide receivers. I think they're just spreading the ball out a bit too far, with the exception of Kelce. But going back the other way, you've got Michael Pittman from the Colts, and you've also got Jonathan Taylor, who you can put in those same stacks going back the other way. Jalen Hurts in 4 teams. He's a little bit cheaper than the top line quarterbacks. I think Mahomes, Allen, and Herbert all around 15,000, 16,000. So Hurts is a little bit cheaper. Washington have given up a fair few points this year, and Hurts has got the rushing upside as well. Stacked him with AJ Brown, got a fair bit of Dallas Goedert as well, who comes in a little bit underpriced. And Washington, going back the other way, I haven't touched Antonio Gibson, but there's plenty of Washington wide receivers you can use going back the other way. Those being Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and Jahan Dotson. Then into my smaller stacks, Matthew Stafford against Arizona. Arizona have one of the worst defenses at the moment. And yeah, Matthew Stafford comes in pretty cheap considering his caliber. The downside to his cheapness is that you want to stack him with Cooper Kupp, who is the most expensive player on the slate. But he's put up just under 35 points in both games, so it's a pretty easy stack. And then you've got Arizona players coming back the other way in the form of Marquise Brown and Zach Ertz. And you can also double stack Stafford as well, or even potentially triple stack. Allen Robinson recovered a bit from his week 1 and put up a decent stat line last week. And then also Tyler Higbee has been commanding a fair few targets as well. Only a matter of time before he puts up a big game. And that's pretty much their entire passing offense. It's Allen Robinson, it's Tyler Higbee, and the main one is Cooper Kupp. So you know where the ball's going to be going if the ball is thrown around. Then 2 of Tua Tagovailoa. I think he will be fairly highly owned this week, which is why I'm fading him a little bit. I'm also not 100% convinced that he is going to be at the top level of the other quarterbacks in the league. But while he's got a good offensive line and he's got 2 star weapons in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, it is going to be pretty hard for him to fail. And then, going back, I think this is the highest total game. So you've got those 2 players, and then you can also use Stefan Diggs, who started the year extremely well. The one I actually prefer Gabe Davis a little bit more. He's a fair bit cheaper, and Diggs did put up a massive game last week, and that was with Gabe Davis out. And could even go the four big dogs at wide receiver, being Tyreek, Waddle, Davis, and Diggs, and just completely stack out that game. It's the clear highest totaled game on the slate, so that is an option. Joe Burrow, I can't give up on him yet. I've picked him the first 2 weeks, and now he comes up against the Jets, who are a pretty soft matchup in themselves. You've got a star weapon in Jamal Chase to pair him up with. Also, T. Higgins is a little bit cheaper, but can still put up those big weeks too. And then at tight end, Hayden Hurst, he is questionable but expected to play, and he's under 6K again, so he's a cheap tight end option that you can flex with. And then going back the other way, Garrett Wilson put up a really big week last week. Looks like he will be the number one wide receiver at the Jets going forward, and he is someone you can play going back the other way. And then I've got one team with Lamar Jackson. I just can't not pick him this year, I don't think. At least in the current form that he's in. He's got the massive chip on his shoulder. He's playing for the contract. They're throwing the ball a lot more this year, and he's still going to be rushing a bunch. So Lamar Jackson stacked with Mark Andrews or Rashad Bateman, or potentially both. I don't think I ended up stacking going back the other way, but there is Nelson Agholor just over 6K is a cheap option if you wanted to do that. Onto the running backs, I've gone pretty condensed this week. There is a variety of prices in there, but I think these guys were the clear best value at these price. So the most expensive running backs were Austin Eckler and Dalvin Cook, and it just when you can get a guy like Jonathan Taylor for under 15K, you just plug him in a bunch. I'm willing to forgive last week. Indianapolis just had a really poor week. They didn't have any wide receiver targets playing in that game, and their offense is completely stalled. This game against Kansas City, their offense is going to need to be working, and I think it will be. It's the only way they'll survive. So yeah, I'm backing the Colts to bounce back, and for that reason, I think Taylor is a good option. And we saw against Houston as well, even when they did go behind early, Jonathan Taylor was still heavily utilized. Speaking of Houston, my number one option is Damien Pierce. Had a small role week one, seemed to be the number one running back last week for Houston. And now he comes into a matchup against one of the worst teams in the league. This will be a good opportunity for him to stake his claim on the role. And also, there's a good chance that Houston will have positive game script, so that will lead to more rushing opportunities than usual for Pierce. So at 8,000, which is basically the basement for running backs that are playable, I'm happy to load up on Pierce. It's a small gamble. We don't know that he's 100% got the role, but I'm going to back the talent to shine through and back Houston to make a meal of Chicago. And then the four, supplementary options I've used. Leonard Fournette coming up against Green Bay. The Bucks have just got a bunch of weapons to their top line wide receivers. Mike Evans is suspended, obviously. Chris Godwin's still out. And then you've got Russell Gage, Julia Jones, and Bashard Perriman, who are all under injury clouds. So for that reason, I think that Tampa Bay will rely on the rushing game a bit more. Fournette is questionable, but it's really a fake questionable as far as what I've read. He's expected to suit up with no issues at all. Then I've got Joe Mixon. I think he slid under the radar a bit because he hasn't gotten to the end zone yet, and Cincinnati haven't been great, so there hasn't been the game script for him. The main knock on Joe Mixon in the past was that he wasn't getting receptions. He wasn't being used as a three-down back, but he is this year. He had 7 receptions in the first game, I think, and 3 in the second game. So his ceiling's risen a bit more, but he hasn't had one of those ceiling games yet. And against the weaker New York Jets that just conceded 3 touchdowns to Nick Chubb, I think Mixon could fly under the radar here. Then I've got Josh Jacobs. He's genuine questionable. If he ends up being out, I will have to rearrange my teams a bit, flip him to Pierce in a few of them, and probably try and move him up to possibly a Clyde or a Sanders, who I haven't got at all, but he's another one that interests me. Tennessee have been pretty woeful this year, and Jacobs should get the goal line work. He is fairly cheap, capable of decent games. I don't think he'll have like a 30, 40-point game, but he is capable of hitting like 20, 25 and delivering value for money. And then I've got Clyde as well. He started the season pretty well. He has crossed into the end zone a bit, so his numbers are a little bit inflated, but he looks a lot better. He's put some weight on, looks good as a runner, will be used as a receiver as well. Won't have 100% of the backfield, but should have a big enough share to be able to put up a good score. Onto wide receivers. I've gone pretty condensed at the running back, and that means I've gone very wide at wide receiver. I've also my flex spot is basically almost exclusively used for wide receivers as well, so I'll go into that afterwards. AJ Brown in a lot of my Hurts stacks, but also as a standalone option is very cheap at 13,000. There's a couple of thousand less than the top line receivers, but a couple of thousand less than like the second tier of receivers, but he can produce at those levels. 4K off Jefferson and Kupp, but he still represents very good value at this price. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he started the season very well, and another matchup that has a big total. Easy to put in the Goff stacks, and he's been outperforming his price all year, and I don't see why this doesn't continue against the Vikings. Justin Jefferson, very expensive, mainly in my Goff stacks. He is really hard to fit into other teams just because you got to spread the salary around a bit. But if you can manage to do that with him or with Kupp, then I think that can pay dividends. And because it's hard to do, it might be a bit less owned than what it should be. Michael Pittman, mostly used as going back against my Mahomes stacks, but he is a good standalone option, the clear number 1 wide receiver in the Indianapolis, and he did put up a good week 1 when he did play. He was questionable at the start of the week, but he is fully fit and ready to go. Curtis Samuel, I'll go through Washington altogether. So you got Curtis Samuel, you got Terry McLaurin, and you have Jahan Dotson. They're all good options, I think. This is going to be one of the higher totaled games unless Carson Wentz has a meltdown, which is possible. I'm not going to rule that out. It is Carson Wentz. But yeah, at under 10K, I've mainly got Samuel, McLaurin, and Dotson in my Hurts stacks, hoping that one is one of the bigger games and there's action going back both ways. He is okay as a standalone option, but I think I prefer all the Washington players just in my stacks, just to be on the safer side, in case Carson Wentz has one of the meltdown games that he is capable of doing. Cooper Kupp, as mentioned before, is going to be hard to put into lineups with other stacks, but if you can do that, then it's a really good option. Mostly is in my Stafford stacks, but I've tried to fit him into other stacks as well. Hollywood Brown's still cheap, has been cheap for all 3 weeks. Hasn't really produced one of those week winning performances, but he is capable. Against the Rams, this should be a high scoring game as well. This could be the week that he finally does it, and it could be the week that a bunch of people jump off him. And if that's the case, then I'm happy to take him here. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and Gabe Davis, I'll mention them all together because they're all in my tour stacks. I think they're all good standalone options as well. I've got a couple of other teams where I've gone, say like my Hurts, AJ Brown and Terry McLaurin stack on that side, and then basically double stacked with Gabe Davis and Jalen Waddle going back the other way. I think all of these guys are really good options this week. It's the highest total game on the slate. Buffalo have had a good defense this year, but they're missing their 2 starting corners. So I'm very interested to see what Tua does this week. You obviously still have to deal with the Buffalo pass rush, which has been very strong this year. But Miami also have one of the better offensive lines in the league, so they might be able to deal with it better than the Bills' opponents from earlier this year. Who did I miss here? Also Stefan Diggs. He's not a bad price. I prefer to go without him just because I think he will be highly owned, and that second week I think is a bit inflated. I prefer to go up to the Kupp and Jefferson options if you can, or possibly a Tyreek, or down to an AJ Brown or like Waddle. I think he's a bit inflated at the price, and I'm fading him apart from to a stack. Jamal Chase, he's capable of having big weeks. Week 1 he should have had a 40-odd week. I've only got him in my Burrow stacks at the moment, but again, he could be someone that I slide into my team a bit more after I make some alterations at 2 a.m. on Monday morning. Drake London, he's the clear number 1 at Atlanta. And Seattle, it should be an easy matchup. It should be a game that they've got a decent chance of winning if they want to win it. The only slight question mark is if Arthur Smith is double faking us and after not using Kyle Pitts for a couple of weeks, decides that he's actually a part of the offense now. But I just don't know. Drake London, he's only played 2 games, but he's performed well in both of them. And what should be an easier matchup, it could be a week where he puts up a 30 or a 40 and really announces himself. So I'm happy to take Drake London here. Obviously, don't have any Atlanta stacks, but I think as a standalone option, he is a good one. Garrett Wilson, he looks like the number 1 receiver at the Jets now. Still has some competition. I've mainly got him in my Burrow stacks, but you can go him as a standalone option. Don't mind him at under 10K. Allen Robinson, I think he's only a stack option for me. Just with Cooper Kupp going to be taking the lion's share of targets, it's going to be hard for Robinson to put up like a super monster score unless Kupp gets injured. Agholor mentioned before, under 6K could be a bit of a pod option. I think I actually did use him on my Baltimore stack. There are better 6K options. I'll get to them a bit later. Stefan Diggs mentioned it before. Christian Kirk has done well this year. Tougher matchup this week, but still pretty cheap. T. Higgins in the Burrow stack, Bateman in the Lamar stack. Treylon Burks is carving out a role for himself in Tennessee, and he might be the number one wide receiver now. It's not really a game I've looked to target too much from the Tennessee side of things because they've looked pretty awful, but yeah, he could break out this week. Got him in one team as a punt. Dotson mentioned before. Chris Olave. I'll move into my flex section because I think I've got him a bit more in there. Yeah, Chris Olave. He's had really good underlying stats. I think it was something like 300 air yards, which resulted in about 60 receiving yards. So um, Jameis is looking for him, and it seems like a matter of when and not if for when Olave has his big game. Couple of thousand above basement, but if he does have that big game against Carolina, then you're happy to pay for that. Your two cheaper guys, Jarvis Landry and Brashad Perriman. Um, I haven't really used them that much, surprisingly. When I was initially building my team, I thought I would have like 6, 7, maybe 8 each of them. But I was able to find my value in the running backs with Damien Pierce and Clyde and Josh Jacobs. And you can even throw in Miles Sanders, who I didn't put in my teams, but he's another example of players that are value at that running back position, which meant I could beef up the wide receivers a bit more, and I'm not using these cheap guys as much. Jarvis Landry, he's still a clear misprice at 6K. He's capable of putting up a solid week. Brashad Perriman, need to monitor what the Tampa Bay wide receiver situation is. He could conceivably be the number one target if all of Gage, Jones, Godwin, and Evans are out. The later two are already confirmed out. The other two we're waiting on. You can also go for a Scotty Miller here. He's also 6K, and if there are further outs in the wide receiver department at Tampa, then he comes into play too. I have Perriman just slightly ahead of him at the moment. I'll get to Zach Ertz with the tight ends. Brandon Cook under 10K always goes under the radar and a good matchup against Chicago. Logan Thomas I'll go through with tight ends. I think I've mentioned all of these players. What is that 0 there? That's interesting. I'll have to look at that. And then on to tight ends. So the two that were in the flex, Zach Ertz and Logan Thomas, they're exclusively part of stacks. My number one target this week is Travis Kelce. I think anything under 15K is unders for Kelce. He's the clear number one target at Kansas City. Does mean he will get double teamed a bit, but he's too good to be held down. So yeah, Kelce's the main guy I'm going for. The other one I really like is Dallas Goedert. He's been putting up good numbers, and he looks like he's being used more than Devonta Smith in the offense. Looks like a clear AJ Brown on top, then Dallas Goedert, then Devonta Smith for mine. And yeah, he's been putting up good numbers first couple of weeks. Good matchup against Washington. I don't see why it doesn't continue. A few with Irv Smith. These are all in my Goff stacks. I think he's decent. Like, he's not anything to write home about in terms of price, but he did put up a good week last week, and he could do the same again, and that would make my stack pretty nice. Tyler Higbee has been commanding a lot of targets from Matthew Stafford. I only put him in my stacks at this stage. I wanted to pick Kelce where I could, and if I couldn't pick Kelce, then I wanted to pick Goddard or Mark Andrews. But I think Higbee is a decent salary relief option as well if you want to go cheap at tight end. I just think, the prices of the premium tight ends at the moment just means that I'm not looking to go too cheap this week. Mark Andrews, he's another one that's underpriced. I just prefer Kelsey a bit more in that matchup, but Andrews is more than fine if you need to save a couple of K. And then Hayden Hurst, I've only got him in my Cincinnati stack, but he is, again, another option if you need to go cheap at tight end. And then, Zach Ertz and Logan Thomas in my flex spots for those double tight end stacks. And, don't mind them. And then defense was pretty difficult for me this week because, my main two options that I like are the Bucks and the Eagles. The Eagles, picking them, and they will come into play if Carson Wentz melts down. I think the Eagles' defense has beefed up a bit this year. Did pretty well against the Vikings on Monday night, although I'm not sure how much you read into that because Kirk Cousins is not a great quarterback on Monday nights. And then the other one I've gone for is Tampa Bay. They come up against Green Bay, who you would, on the surface, Green Bay look like they're a decent offense, but Tampa Bay's defense against the run is very good, or has been very good in the past. And Green Bay's weapons basically exist in the running game. It's Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, who are their main two offensive weapons. So with that in mind, I think the Bucks can keep Green Bay to a low total and can get to the quarterback a bit, put up a decent score for a DST. My favorite cheaper option is the Jets. I'm not too confident on them, but out of all the 4K options, they do look the best to me. Going up against Cincinnati, they might concede a lot of points. It's a risk I'm willing to take. But also the Bengals O-line and Joe Burrow in particular have been giving up a bunch of sacks this year. So maybe the Jets can continue that trend. There's a chance that they don't and get 35 put on their head. But at 4K, they were the best cheaper option. The Bills, coming into the week, I was planning on using them a bit more, but with the injuries to the cornerbacks, and also watching the tour film from last week, I don't think they put up a big score. It's definitely capable, but I think it's more than likely that they'll put up a middling score, which is kind of what they're priced at. And for that reason, I'm happy to avoid them. Carolina Panthers, Jameis Winston's taking a few sacks this year as well. Basically punting on a pick six or a string of interceptions to make the Panthers relevant. I've got one Bengals team. They're a bit more expensive than the Bucks and the Eagles. The Jets gave up a bunch of sacks last week. Joe Flacco under quarterback means they might not perform that well. Probably my third favorite option. I did prefer the Bucks and the Eagles a bit more, but the Bengals are definitely an option you can go for as well. One team of the Chargers, their defense is a lot better this year, and I didn't really attack that. I'm just not really sure how much to attack that game because obviously doubts over Justin Herbert means that their offensive weapons, if Justin Herbert doesn't play, then their offensive weapons take a downgrade. And if he does play, then there's a big chance that he's limited, not 100%. And if their offense isn't performing as well, then it puts their defense under more pressure. So I don't know. I just wanted to avoid that game this week. There's a chance that Justin Herbert's completely fine and the Chargers go marching on. But Jacksonville have also looked pretty good this year. I think their defense comes into play as well if Justin Herbert is confirmed out. I might switch some Jets out and I might change a couple of my Bucks and Eagles to Jags if Herbert is out. I still think their offense can be fine, though, if Herbert isn't playing. It's definitely something to keep an eye on, though, Justin Herbert's status. Are they playing in the first window? No, they're playing in the second window, so it might be tough to make adjustments to them. We'll have to monitor injury news as it drops. And then going back to that. And then the other DST I put in there, Raiders just the punt. Tennessee have looked pretty awful this season, and yeah, it's a chance that it's the same again. And yeah, um, Raiders, yeah, just a punt to that 4,800 spot. Wasn't really too enthused to pick them, but yeah, it just was the way that that team worked out. So yeah, that's my breakdown of all the players and DSTs I'm using. There's a chance it changes between now and lockout, but yeah, I hope that this can guide you in the correct direction, and that someone that's watching this video can be top of the leaderboard. So I'll see you back sometime in the middle of next week to run through how well or how awfully we have done. And I've been, yeah, down 140-ish in both competitions so far, so hopefully this is the week that the tide turns back the other way and we can take a profit. So yeah, once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next video.